What's up, guys? Doug Polk here, and welcome back for another episode of Poker Hands. Today we're going to be breaking down a hand from the Hustler Casino live stream between two fan favorites, Wesley and Nik Airball.
Raise. 1,000. Heads up.
You guys have...
Our hand begins at 100, 200, 400 with a $200 ante, and Nik Airball opening it up with 4-3 of diamonds. 4-3, not the strongest of suited connectors, but when you are on the button, this is certainly a hand you want to play, especially when your opponents have millions of dollars in front of them. Over to Wesley with ace deuce of diamonds. This is the kind of hand that you don't mind calling with or 3-betting with pre-flop. I'd say maybe you lean towards call, but you throw it in every now and then. I will note, as the stacks get deeper, you want to be a little more likely to 3-bet, with the reason being flopping the nut flush draw or hitting the nut flush when you're extremely deep can be very valuable. And let's just say completely hypothetically speaking, you flush over flush someone, it would be nice to have as big of a pot as possible. Also, the robots say it's good. Anyway, he does decide to go ahead and call, and let's take a flop.
Any idea how tilted Bobo is? That Pepe's not sitting at the table right now. But I'll get back to that after this hand because we have a flush on flush collision. And these players are mega deep.
The flop comes King Jack 10 of diamonds, which should be a huge score for Wesley. And if you like huge scores, head on down to the lodge this weekend for our $2 million guaranteed main event, $3,000 buy-in. Last year we overlaid several hundred thousand. This year, hopefully we don't. But if you want a chance to win hundreds of thousands of dollars, head on down to the lodge this weekend. The first flight is already running, or will be tonight, whenever this video posts. I really don't know. Back to the hand with the ace deuce of diamonds. Wesley checks on the flop as he should with all of his hands, and now Airball needs to start building the pot. On boards like King Jack 10 of diamonds, you want to start off with small bets on the flop because your opponent either has a diamond or a strong pair / straight, or they have nothing. In these kinds of situations, you want to lean towards small bets. I remember back in the day, people used to think, oh, monotone board, lots of draws, bet big. But it turns out that betting small is nice because your opponent simply either has hands that can continue or they don't. And small bets really pester hands like, let's say, Jack 8 of clubs or pocket threes with a diamond or pocket threes or ace 9 of spades. Those hands are just going to be folds, but you get the point. The point is those hands really suck versus small bets, but can easily fold versus larger ones. Anyway, Wesley does check raise this $1,000 bet to $7,000. I don't mind doing this. Typically speaking, when you have your flushes that have low kickers, you tend to like to raise and build the pot. I will note every now and then a call is good as well. I do think, though, this size should probably be a bit smaller. I would like to maybe make this more like 3,000 or 4,000. Typically speaking, for the same reasons you like to bet small in the flop, the check raise also likes to be small because if Airball has a hand like, let's just say, a king, it's going to be pretty dicey versus that small size, and he's going to have to make some tough decisions. Back over to Airball facing a raise this large. Even though you have a very strong hand on the flop, there are certainly many flushes that have you beat, and for this reason, you really want to just call. If you're going to 3-bet here on the flop, you really want it to be based around having the ace or queen of diamonds. Either you have the flush or a straight flush or the second nut flush, or you're bluffing with a diamond that has a lot of removal against your opponent. Either way, when your opponent does start making big raises, and guys, this is a good poker concept, when you get check raised in a spot and your opponent goes big, usually you can just continue all your hands by calling because your opponent should be very polarized when they use a big size. So in Airball's shoes here, I think I'd like to go ahead and just call this check raise, which he decides to do, and let's take a turn.
Board does not pair. Wesley check mark his opponent with a hand that can pay off multiple big bets. That looks like an overbet. Incoming. 30,000 into 16.5. That's still a flush Airball, but your opponent's repping a nut hand. Snap. If Sammy keeps this clean.
The turn comes in offsuit 8. The board still has not paired. Both players have flushes on a board where a flush is the nuts, and Wesley has the nuts unless his opponent has queen 9 of diamonds. Now Wesley decides to go ahead and bet almost 2x pot, 30,000 into a pot of 17,000. I do think that the size makes some sense, maybe a little bigger than I would like to go here, but typically speaking, when you check raise a flop and the turn is a brick, usually if you do bet, you want to go for a big size. That said, he's betting so big now that he can't even really bet things other than medium to good flushes. I'm not even sure if a low flush could bet for this size. It's just simply such a large size. I think in this situation, Wesley is going to be polar between hands that have a high diamond, like we talked about before, the ace of diamonds or queen of diamonds, or he's just going to have high flushes. Over to Airball, 4-3 of diamonds is kind of an interesting situation. Yes, he can have a lot of higher diamonds. He can have hands like sets that want to call, and you definitely want to play tight when your opponent bets this huge on the turn. However, I will note there is something kind of nice about 4-3 of diamonds. When you have these low flushes, you actually block your opponent from having ace-4, ace-3 of diamonds, or queen-4, queen-3 of diamonds, the kinds of hands that would certainly call pre-flop and would not be looking to 3-bet nearly as much. Because of this hand actually is kind of nice facing large bets. You block a lot of the flushes. It's more likely your opponent is bluffing when they have a high diamond. Realistically, you're not going to be able to fold flushes here in any capacity. So the spot's getting a bit dicey, but you're going to have to call, which Nik does, and let's take a river.
And he does. How much is Wesley going to get paid? Oh, this looks like a big boy bet. Looks like 6 figures. More? Oh, Nik is not liking this. You saw that face.
200K.
200.
The river comes in offsuit 3, and now Wesley has to decide what to do with his nut flush. Once you've check raised, bet big, you typically want to keep barreling because you're very polarized when you bet 30,000, and your opponent's going to have a lot of hands they simply want to show down. Wesley considers his options and decides to bet 200,000 into 77,000, and in my personal opinion, this bet is just simply way too big. Now look, once you have the nut flush and it's essentially the nuts and you're either going to have the ace of diamonds or you're going to have the goods, you can argue for some really, really big sizes, and certainly I'm sure every now and then the solver would like something this large. But the problem with this strategy is going to be your opponent simply gets to fold most of their hands, and it leaves you with a very small range of hands you can get value from. Of course, you can also be bluffing when you go for this size, but when you're bluffing, card removal plays more of a role. So I think typically speaking in these spots, I'd like to see about pot or 150% pot. Betting 2.5x pot just feels a little bit greedy to me. At some point, you have to wonder, does it make more sense to just go all in if you're going to be using this big of a size? And then you can bluff with the ace of diamonds and you can value bet when you have a straight flush or the nut flush. But either way, I think in this situation, this size is simply just too big. And this is a good rule of thumb. It's easy to want to get greedy and try and bet massive when you have a good hand. But remember, you need to bet sizes your opponent can call and you're going to get enough action from. It is possible, however, that I am an idiot because Wesley knows his customer. Wesley is a true artist, a modern day Michelangelo in the game of poker. Picasso had his paintings. Wesley has his chips. Maybe in theory, you're supposed to bet $100,000 here. But when you know what your opponent has and how to get some value, you can Vincent van Gogh to 200K. This bet feels too big, but when you know the Da Vinci Code, it doesn't seem too big at all. Over to Nik Airball, and he is salivating at Salvador Dali when he bets 200K on the river. Will he win this pot, or will the spoils of war go to Andy Warhol, Georgia O'Keeffe, Rembrandt, David Hockney? I'm running out of artists for this joke. In all seriousness though, Airball has to decide, does he want to Caravaggio out $200,000 from his stack and make this call, or should he let it go? And I don't think this is actually too clear cut. For starters, it's a lot better to have low flushes than even middling flushes because a hand like ace queen of diamonds, ace nine of diamonds, ace eight of diamonds, those hands are much more likely to 3-bet pre-flop, although maybe that's less true as you get towards ace eight. Your opponent either has the nut flush or the second nut flush, and so we have to decide what are our best calls. Well, in Airball's shoes, we certainly can't have both of those hands ourselves, and so I think I lean a little bit more towards the higher flushes, but we do need to call some non-nut flushes, and this hand might fit the bill. The problem that I have with this situation is that this hand facing a bet that's this large probably mixes in both options. I think you might call every now and again, but you're certainly going to be doing a decent chunk of folding. And so my main takeaway here, and this is probably something that Airball should work on a little bit in general, is this is the kind of spot for a big enough decision. He needs to take his time and probably mix in some laydowns every now and then. This hand in isolation, not a terrible hand to call with, but the rapid speed of light that Airball puts these chips in probably should have a little more thought going into it.
200K.
200,000 and a snap call.
Artist! Real art.
476.5.
Before we go, Upswing Poker has a new tournament course, Road to Victory, by Darren Elias and Nick Petrangelo. If you're interested in checking it out, I'll put a link in the description below. All right, guys, I'll see you later. Thanks for tuning in.